Well, hello everyone. This is Joyce Davis. I'm PennLive's outreach and opinion editor, and we have another editorial board meeting for you that we are making available to our readers and, of course, our viewers, since we will also have this on video. But we're just about to step into an intense period of interviewing candidates in the 2024 elections that are hoping to represent Pennsylvanians. But we thought we'd start by talking to some faith leaders, some who have are a bit concerned about the atmosphere. They've sent out an appeal to people, not only of faith, but I guess people of conscience, to do all they can to try to keep these next few weeks as peaceful as possible. Now, sometimes that seems like a tall order for especially the kinds of letters and messages I'm getting sometimes, but I thought we would bring in these faith leaders to simply lay the groundwork and give us the right spirit as we step into this. And I'm going to start perhaps with the Reverend Erin Jones so that she can introduce the people who are with her in this interfaith coalition. Reverend Jones?
Thank you, Joyce. Yes, I am Reverend Erin Jones. I am with Lutheran Advocacy Ministry in Pennsylvania. We are merely the conduit for this movement that was started by our 7 bishops of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America here in Pennsylvania. We have one of their representatives, Bishop Craig Miller of the Upper Susquehanna Synod. But we have 7 synods here in Pennsylvania with a lot of Lutherans to coordinate, and their gracious leadership led to this movement of over I believe at my last count, actually now over 400 people of faith have signed on to our statement calling entitled Choices and Voices for Peace, which calls for peace in the election. We're so glad to have with us Reverend Larry Pickens of the Pennsylvania Council of Churches, and Rabbi Finman of the JCC and Center for Loving Kindness here in Pittsburgh, and so delighted to have Reverend Sandy Strauss as well with us. So I will, because it is
and of course, you have Bishop Craig Miller with her. You've identified that, but yes, I understand that Rabbi Finman has to get going shortly. So why don't we start with you, Rabbi? Would you tell us just why you have signed on to this and what you're hoping from it?
Sure, thank you. Yes, and my apologies, as the Shabbat clock is beyond the computer clock, and it shows up no matter what. So thank you for making the spaciousness for that and modeling what it means to be in a multi-faith setting. So thank you for that. For me, there is so much fear that we are feeling. The JCC is a center in a center, meaning we are the center part here in Squirrel Hill. We have many people walking through, and my office is right near the hub of it all. And so I get a roving door of people who are really scared about this upcoming election from all sides. And so for me, it feels like the Hebrew word chiyuv, meaning obligation, that we as Jewish leaders have an obligation, one, to ensure that everyone has access to vote, know their rights to vote, and debunk some of the myths of who can and can't vote, but then really along the way to ensure it's peaceful, whether it means it's peaceful in my own office, whether it's peaceful in the departments within my own organization, my phone, my WhatsApp conversations, or peaceful within the broader community. So signing on for me was really more of an accountability as a new rabbi of, oh, I put my name out there, I have to actually do it. So for me, it was really good to just, be in a group with so many people, and to then be in Harrisburg and to just look around the room and have that reminder of like, oh, I'm not alone in this work. It's not just me in my office doing this. There's actually not just 10 people or 20 people, but there's hundreds of people who deeply, 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 deeply want a peaceful and safe election, both leading up to the election, what happens on November 5th, and then what happens after is also something that's really important for us. So that's my involvement, and I'll pause there.
Yes, Rabbi, I think I just want to drill down just a tad bit. You said that you're really afraid. You're so many people around you are afraid. why? What has led you to feel that way?
Yeah,
And I know
my
that's a simple question, but
Oh,
I
and
think
I might get a little, the Yiddish word for "klumped," where we start to like choke up. I'm an emotional person. I'm human. Um, the fear for me is not really what happens in the government and what happens in DC and what happens on paper with politicians. The fear for me is people then deciding who they can and cannot interact with. So I think about, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year coming up in a few short weeks, and people are making decisions of who they normally for 30 years have dinner with or go to services with. Now they can't go because they're voting differently or they're assuming the person's voting differently. And so my fear really stems from how do we ensure that this election doesn't continue to fracture our communities and families and create more divides, and in Pittsburgh, more bridges and more tunnels. We have enough bridges. We got plenty of tunnels. We don't need more. So it's less about the policies, because I know there's so many good people who are doing good work. When policies are changed, there's still really good people out there going beyond what the politicians are doing. For me, it's really about making sure our communities don't fall apart, and we really stick together and can be neighborly, and we really, can look out for each other.
And we would be remiss if we didn't, unfortunately, remind people that the Pittsburgh Jewish community experienced one of the most horrific shootings that I think our country has ever done with the synagogue a few years back. So our hearts are with you, and we fully understand how you're feeling. So I go ahead. You wanted to add something, Rabbi?
I'm just going to say thank you for noticing that. So thank you.
Tree of Life, yes, synagogue. Well, before we go on, and of course, Rabbi, we know you have to leave, and when you have to leave, feel free to do it. We're not going to be upset, except that you won't be here with us, but we understand. But before we go on, I want to at least identify for everyone the editorial board members who are here with us. We do have Vinnie Portzline, who has been with us for quite a few years now, and she's really a strong advocate for people with disabilities. We were glad to have her in our group. We also have the Reverend Sandy Strauss. I know she's with your group, but she's with our group too. And she has been one of our strongest voices on the editorial board as well. Always an advocate for justice and for, just doing the right thing. So thank you, Reverend Strauss, for being here. And my fellow person here who battles with me every week on Battleground PA, Jeffrey Lord, who is a strong supporter of President Donald Trump. But we somehow managed to get along, don't we, Jeffrey?
Yes, we do. What
Yes,
else is there to do?
Yeah, well, it's good to have you here, Jeffrey, as well. And I think someone else has just joined us. So why don't we would you like to introduce Benjamin Asan, right?
Yes, Benjamin, thank you for joining us from the Turkish Cultural Center here in Pittsburgh.
Oh, very good. Welcome. So glad to have you here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. This is Benjamin. I am here on behalf of Turkish Cultural Center, Pittsburgh. I'm the community outreach coordinator. That's the 5th year. Before then, I was directing Erie Turkish Cultural Center for 5 years as an volunteer imam over there for the Turkish community. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you. All right. So I guess what I'd like to do maybe now is turn to Bishop Miller, because this does seem like it is a Lutheran led, even though you have your colleagues. And I know even Bishop Burgos, what's it? Burgos Nunez is from the UMC, the United Methodist Church, is definitely signed on to this. That's my church, so I know that we're definitely standing with you. But Bishop Miller, would you like to share with us how all of this came about?
Certainly, and thank you. We do appreciate all those who have signed on to this statement with us, and many of whom were at the press conference that we held in Harrisburg on September 5th. But this, of course, began well before September 5th. In conversations that we've had amongst the bishops, with our advocacy office that Erin is one of the leaders in, that we felt that there was a need to say something as we continued to watch and listen to the rhetoric among folks in political campaigns, and to hear some of the things that were being said in our communities, even to read signs along the road that we see sometimes that are quite disturbing. And I think finally to note that in our congregations where, like Joyce, you and Jeffrey have, the disagreements that are present sometimes, as the rabbi said, are lead to difficulties in our coming together. That congregations are split sometimes by the politics of the day. I have seen congregations, well, we have lots of Lutherans, as Aaron said, and so there are lots of Lutheran churches around, and I'm watching as they begin to segment into Republican congregations and Democratic congregations, rather than what we've had as a mix of people in our congregations. And we feel that there is a need to recognize the dialogue that we ought to be having, and that there is something more that we live with beyond just being Republicans and Democrats, or libertarians and progressives, or whatever labels we put on ourselves, but that certainly in the Christian communities, we say we are labeled, of course, with the name of Jesus Christ, and that name ought to bring us together, not divide us. So the bishops, we came together and came up with a document that we could share, and wanted very much to invite our friends and colleagues to join us in making this statement, so that we could show the power not only of the Christian communities, but of all the faith communities in Pennsylvania, the power to speak for peace, to model peace. We see ourselves and our coming together I think probably in a similar way that you do, Jeffrey and Joyce, to show that we don't need to be separate and enemies of one another, but that we can continue to have conversations even when the issues are difficult, and when our feelings are strong, as they are in this campaign for so many.
Well, that's beautiful. That's well said. And I will say this, that Jeffrey and I have strong differences, but we both respect each other. We've stated that publicly, and we know how to debate and discuss and still be friendly, right?
I should add, by way of background, I was born and raised in Massachusetts until we left after the 8th grade. My mom and dad were very, very involved in Republican politics in Massachusetts. It was Northampton, Massachusetts. Dad held Calvin Coolidge's old seat on the Northampton City Council, was the Republican City Committee chair, and Mom was the chair of the Hampshire County Republican Women. Their best friends were prominent Democrats in town, who were always coming over for dinner, or vice versa, hanging out. Their 2 young daughters were my babysitter. So I learned, in essence, role models right in front of me. And since then, I've gone on to live a life where I have lots and lots of friends on the other side of the aisle. And there's more to life than just politics.
Absolutely right. Can I say amen to that, Jeffrey?
Amen. The Lord approves.
Yes, indeed.
Let me bring Reverend Pickens here in, because he is representing the Pennsylvania Council of Churches, which really includes a great diversity of Christian churches. And he's also signed on to this. And Reverend Pickens, have you had any problems within your group about signing on to this kind of statement?
No, I think most people are interested in having conversations. And when that is impeded, people get concerned, particularly in such a heated environment in which we find ourselves. So I think that our constituents have been very supportive of this effort. And when Bishop Kusero approached me about having the Pennsylvania Council of Churches being engaged in this process and actively recruiting our constituents, I was very happy do so, because I think that it's important that we be the conduit for conversations to happen and to address issues of justice. So that's been my experience as a member of the Pennsylvania Council of Churches.
Very good. So all of your churches really have signed on to this. And the truth is, I mean, we act like it's such a controversial thing, right? It's just calling for people to be nice, right? To not resort to violence. And yet we're at a time where it seems like you have to make the statement. You have to at least say it, right? Let's bring in Imam Asan. Would you like to maybe share your perspective on it from the Muslim perspective?
So I would like to add something. Thank you so much for having us for this informative meeting. So before the election, and then the peace is so important for the all faith background and cultural background in especially all the nationwide and for our state, Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, where I live in. And then we do many different program and events, and then we'll have a friendship dinner on October 17th. And then we are inviting, this is so related for this topic that, and then our topic is for this year, the contribution of the diversity on Pittsburgh. This is so important. And we invite many different background, cultural, religious, NGO organizations. It's going to be looks like a rose garden, just a garden, but all different, smells good, perfect. This is what we need to live together. And this is so important. And thank you for starting this. I hope that that's the God willings work together, and then they show and then they spread the peace all around our state, especially the all nationwide. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, one of our editorial board members, I know, will be sorry he's not here, Saeed Onal, who's also with the Turkish Cultural Center, and he's
I know.
Yes, editorial board as well. He's just not able to join us because he's also a working guy. So, but I'll make sure that he knows you were here. And in full disclosure, I have to share with our audience and with our speakers here that I am a lay leader for the Susquehanna Conference of the United Methodist Church, and I'm a member of the Pennsylvania Council of Churches. So I want to make sure that that's fully disclosed. And yes, I'm a woman of faith. So there you have it. All right, but let's do this. Let's come in, and I'm going to open it to Vinny and to Reverend Strauss and to Jeffrey. If you have questions you'd like to ask, I guess the only thing that I'm still, working with is, what can I do? If my viewers and readers are looking at this, what can they do? They're ready to help you, but how?
That's wonderful. Yeah, we are really hoping that this is a spark of reinvigorated relationships, reinvigorated engagement by people of faith. So the statement remains open. I believe the bishops intend for it to stay open through the transition period, so into January, so people can add their names to it. Anyone, not just ordained folk, but any person of faith or good conscience who wants to add their name can do that. And that can be found on any of our synod's websites. So if you Google Lutheran Synod, Pennsylvania, you should
I'll put a link to it in the article. Lutheran,
absolutely.
You can sign on to this. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and if I could add, you asked what you could do. In the statement, although the paragraph that I'm looking at is directed to civic leaders, I think we could direct this actually to almost anyone in our country. When we say we call on people to reach out to those with whom we disagree, just as you do together here, and to sit down together, to listen with an open heart and mind. These are concrete things, although they kind of read generally, but if we can simply, when we see someone with whom we disagree or we think we disagree, to open ourselves for conversation, to ask questions rather than immediately assume that we know what that person is thinking. It's good practice anytime, but particularly when we're in such divisive, such a divisive atmosphere. And I think we could also add our voices, not just to the statement, but in our letters to our representatives, to those who are campaigning particularly, and maybe even to folks who are running against our representatives, to say, let's talk in ways that are not inciting people to anger and violence, but let's talk about each other in ways that build one another up. Again, for our tradition, the eighth commandment, as we Lutherans number them, says you shall not bear false witness. And our interpretation of that as Lutherans is that we not only do we not lie about people, but we look to say good things about others, to put a positive assumption about them before we just go and say that they're evil and to degrade and dehumanize them. And we can call on our leaders and our neighbors to do that as well, and ourselves.
Very good. Reverend Strauss.
Yes, full disclosure, I was very happy to receive this and sign on to it almost immediately. And I was at the press event last week, so I was gratified to see the number of people who actually were there and supporting it. And one confession, I'm a little sad that I'm no longer in any kind of official position to be able to work on this, but I have shared it with a lot of friends and also. But my question is, have there been any overtures, or has there been any inroads made to some of the more conservative traditions who might not be as likely to sign on to this so quickly, evangelicals or just some of the more conservative traditions out there?
Yeah, we have put it out to as many different places as possible, and certainly have relied on existing ecumenical relationships that our bishops all have. And we have a couple representatives from various traditions. We have a few Catholic bishops that are signatories, and I think one or two non-denominational signatories as well. And we are open, and I think this is helping us understand where are growing edges, where are the relationships that we need to lean into, where do we need to have more dialogue as people of faith, how can we expand our table and bring people to it. So the invitation is open, and any are welcome to join in. Bishop.
I was just thinking that question is a challenge to us. Anyone who signed on to this who has relationships or could have relationships with those more conservative traditions to ourselves reach out. So now you have, I've given you something, now you've given me something.
Well, I'll tell you that I was participating in a webinar recently where I think it's a United Methodist campaign to compel or to encourage 100% voter participation at each church. That puts that on the church. You must get 100% people to vote, right? And I'm wondering, as we hear this, it's so hard sometimes what you guys are asking. Peace can be hard, especially if you're afraid. We heard the fear, right? And especially for me, if I hear that racist language and stuff that really starts, right, then I'm like, I'm wanting to lash back, right? I never hear that from Jeffrey. Jeffrey never does that. So I'm not really pushed, right? But so how are you helping to train and equip your congregants to deal with this, right? Because we've got to turn to you as the leaders of the faith to tell us What do we do? How do we control this in the face of this anger that we're feeling? What do we do? Take a deep breath.
One of the things that we had at the press conference was resources that our congregations can use. Erin might be able to better name them than I, but I remember we even had someone from Common Ground with us at the press conference. And afterward, when those who were able after the press conference to gather for lunch, we got to hear a little bit about what work is happening by those who we might consider partners. That is available. The Lutheran Advocacy Ministries has resources that they are offering to us and to any congregation, I'm sure. Am I right, Erin?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we are partnering with Common Ground USA, which is the US based on the ground, boots on the ground of Search for Common Ground, which is an international peacemaking and peacekeeping organization. They've done this work all over, and Common Ground USA has some really great, wonderful resources for concrete. What do we do? How do we do this? They have a peacemakers toolkit that is available online. And what we are participating in is encouraging people to have Love Anyway feasts, where they invite people from a variety of perspectives to literally sit around a table and break bread. And I think that's something that all of our traditions value and have stories, right? I come from a Christian tradition where literally every Sunday we are gathered around a table breaking bread. And I think that is common among so many of our traditions and the stories of our faith. So that is resources we're putting out. Lutheran Advocacy Ministry in Pennsylvania, LAMPA, does have ways for people to speak out, use their voice to call not only for peace, but any way that you are seeking more justice in the world. It is from a Lutheran perspective, but we always make that editable. So any denomination, any person of faith can always use our resources as the basis of their own action in the world.
Well, we may be coming and stealing some of those resources from you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Steal away for the common good.
Well, Imam, I want to pull you in here because clearly your community also is dealing with some very difficult issues. I mean, I hear every day of the deaths in Gaza, and of course we know what the Israelis went through. So these are tough times for people who want to keep the peace with all wars raging. What are you telling your fellow Muslims about how to deal with these times and maintain peace?
So regarding for your question, and then I just think that for previous years, last 5 years, I can say, there is lots of more newcomers to our nationwide, especially in our city of Pittsburgh, Afghani communities, and then Syrian communities, and they settle up for their cultural centers more than our newcomers. I mean, the Turkish newcomers, because they are really high educated people. In my community, Turkish community, I can say 99% is high educated people. They are doctors, businessmen, and then the lawyers, academic people. But most of them follow the news and the debates and everything, and it is regarding for the leaders, the former president, and then maybe the future upcoming president, Harris, the statements on their speeches, how they react for the cornerstones of the people's for faith traditions, because they follow everything and they know everything. But all of them would like to follow the peace because they know everything as well. So the most important thing is, yes, there is unprecedented things happen on October 7th. everybody same on this point. But the important thing is what was happened out of our country, but doesn't going to be affect our relation with our neighborhood members in here. Everyone can follow their religious traditions, support the community, make their prayers. But the most important thing is we need to do together how we can collaborate the peace and then the fostering diversity in here. And election is really, really important and so tough times for this related with this topic. So most of the people in here, as I said, they just need to be see a peaceful places after election, because they have more questions, because they have, some of them has the visa problems, you know that, and then they are talk each other, if the former president will elected, what we do our visa situations. They talk so much this, and then otherwise, and they talk what was going on in Gaza, and then all around the globe, and then what is the new government's attitude for the supporting the innocent people all around the globe. They talk all everything like that, but as an community leader, we would like to talk with the faith leaders, depending on our network, just follow the peace, and then make a stronger, peaceful, welcoming community in here.
Well, I heard what you say. I think you were indicating your fear that there could be a return of the Muslim ban, the ban on giving Muslims the right to enter this country if President Donald Trump is reelected. Is that what you were indicating?
Yes, I indicated that because they talk so much when they come together for a tea time, you know, that when they talk each other, but because they saw a sample previous years, and then they had this experience, and then they just a little bit afraid of what's going to be.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's reasonable. Are there any other questions for our guests from the editorial board? Yes, Vinny. Go ahead, Vinny. You have to unmute. There you go.
Getting to the button.
Okay.
So what saddens me is the faith part don't all think like you. There are people in congregations who are saying how you should vote because it's righteous justice. Let's take the abortion issue. Catholics are saying, you know, we're not endorsing this candidate because if they have abortion, they'll start executing babies. So things come into exaggeration. Same sex. You know, lots of religions are against that. So they divide people within their congregation. And it's hard for people to get together without feeling like this is my duty to save the world and tell everybody that this is how God wants it. So that part scares me.
Well, I think that part scares a lot of folks, and that's why I think we're having this conversation, and it rises to the level of an editorial board meeting, because so much is at stake personally for us. Yes, Bishop. I'm sorry, you were.
No, that's fine. You are saying very good things, and one of the remarkable things about the statement and those who have signed on is that at least the beginning of some communities with which we would disagree, we have that signatories from some of those communities. You mentioned the Roman Catholic Church. we may disagree to a greater or lesser extent on certain issues, and that sometimes become the single issue that voters vote on, or we may make them single issues and then by doing so drive our people to believe that there's only one way they can vote. The real dangerous thing that you kind of alluded to comes when we begin to think that our vote is going to save the country or save the world, that somehow our action in the voting booth is a salvific act. And that is something that we leaders in the church are very concerned with, especially as it devolves into Christian nationalism, which has its own very dangerous precepts that begins to equate our faith with the political system or a political party even, and perhaps even an individual, to say that again is God's will and God's desire, and that God, where what our statement is saying, God want, and I think somebody said here, God wants you to vote. God wants you to participate in the political sphere through the mechanisms that we have. Go vote. Vote what you think is right for the country, but understand also that others may believe differently. But that doesn't make us enemies. We're not in a country where if we lose the vote, we're going to have to shoot the people who won, or vice versa. At least we haven't been, and we pray that we won't be. And so this is our call, is to calm the rhetoric, bring the rhetoric down, so that we don't go down a road that again, some of us are very fearful we are headed. We mentioned in our statement that the fact that we had a shooting at a political rally, and no matter how we feel about the candidate, that is completely inappropriate. And to now have candidates having to stand in behind glass at their rallies, bulletproof glass, so that they can be among the people. It reminds me of the Pope having to be in his little bubble. We want to be among the people. We don't want to have to be apart and protected, and we don't want our leaders to have to be there either. One of the great things about our country is that the leaders can be among the people.
Very good. Jeffrey, did you have a question? Then we'll go to Reverend Strauss.
Yeah. One of the things that I've sort of come to the conclusion with, and I belong, for the record, to the United Church of Christ. And while the national denomination headquartered in Cleveland is very liberal, the United Church of Christ, and my mother was very involved in the unification of the Congregational and I think it was Evangelical and Reformed Church into the UCC back in, I think it was 1957. One of the premises of the Congregational Church was that every individual church ran itself. That unlike, say, the Catholic Church, where you had the Pope up here issuing, whatever doctrine, and then the whole church had to go. That isn't the way the UCC kept that congregational tradition. So my only concern was, and I mentioned this at the time because I became president of my church council, Chapel Hill Church here in Camp Hill, and I was on the Penn Central Conference Board and all this. My only concern is that we get so swept up in politics that we don't concentrate on what's going on in our own churches. And as I've often said to people in my church, and I suspect the same is true in lots of churches, you've got people. At one point I had to deal with aging parents. You have, we've had members of our congregation who were single moms who were dealing with young kids. We had people who were unemployed, etc. Those are the problems that need to be dealt with by our church. Whereas the sort of grander political themes that we can't you know, I can't pick up the phone and call this president or any president. Well, maybe one
Actually,
president.
you can.
And I worked for another, but still in all, you know, what's most important is what goes on in the little building that you are in and the individual members of that church. And I think sometimes we forget that. And so in my church as it stands today, we just don't go there. We you know, everybody is more concerned about you know, we have a couple in there. The husband just celebrated his 100th birthday, and she like a year behind him. Amazing. So we celebrate their life and their contributions. That's the kind of thing that we do, and I find that really brings the church together.
Very good, Jeffrey. Yeah, Reverend Strauss, Sandy.
Yes. I was, this is probably more of a comment than a question, but you know, we were talking about voting earlier and that whole notion of encouraging people to vote and so on. One of the things that I think people get so almost overly engaged during presidential years, maybe that's not quite the right terminology, but reminding people that it is really important to be looking at your local elections, looking at your state elections. It's not just the president's race every 4 years. And in that process, considering, are the people that you're voting for, maybe you don't agree with their policies, but if they are in a position and willing to be peacemakers, and in other words, in a position where they're not going to be just engaging in the partisan awful rhetoric that goes on, it's really important for us to put people in positions through our vote that are going to model what we should be doing and not make it worse.
Absolutely.
I think you're pointing to the fact, you know, this reality that all of these ways in which we engage in peaceful relationships are intersectional and they ripple out, right? And so, yes, we want to be peaceful in our congregations, right? And we want to be able to like be with people who are different from us in worship. We want to be able to care for our elderly parents and that single mom. And also by engaging in those relationships, we realize that the politics matter, right? That the policies in which determine whether or not that single mom is able to be on WIC, or determine the amount of medical debt those elderly parents have. That matters, and those are determined by our local policies, by our state policies, and by our national policies. And to be sucked into any one of those relationships and to be divisive in that relationship means all the rest fall apart as well. And so I think you're all pointing us to the importance of how all of those are connected. And that's why I think the bishop's statement and this movement is so stunning, that it is calling for peace at all of those levels.
Well, and just to add that if none of those things that you just mentioned happen if all anyone is doing is bickering and getting into the awful sort of rhetoric that goes on. So it's really important to get people who are willing to engage and willing to work out these things instead of just firing shots at each other.
Joyce.
I think Bishop was going to say something. Go ahead, Bishop.
Just quickly, germane to this, one of the things we noticed, not just this year, but maybe it was most evident as we were in the anxious time of COVID, that we have our peace in our congregations, but the political divisiveness, the political anger, anxiety, fear finds its way into those families that are in the pews.
Yeah.
So the same people who are celebrating wonderful events and all are going through, we've for a few years now, we have been putting out how to talk to your family at Thanksgiving.
Yes, beautiful. See, that's concrete help. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
I go to a family reunion every year, and I'm my father's family, and I have to steel myself because my parents' relatives are on a different side of the aisle, many of them, than I am, and be ready for what they might say that will bother me and will grip me in my core and make me want to, as you said earlier, Joyce, you want to lash out at somebody rather than continue to engage in dialogue or say, you know what, let's just leave that to the side. That's something different. Let's talk about the things we share in common. And again, our statement says we all share our common humanity. And let's not take that away from each other in this environment that we're in.
Very true. Jeffrey, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and as Joyce knows, I'm a history geek. One of the things I would just sort of for the record, in 1800, the campaign for president between Thomas Jefferson and incumbent President John Adams was horrendous. They were saying all sorts of things about each other. The Adams people ran a newspaper that said that Thomas Jefferson had fathered illegitimate children with slave Sally Hemings. I mean, it was bad stuff. And I'm just saying that over time, periodically, this happens. The problem for us living in the 21st century is that while all of these things are not new, what's new is relatively new is television, and certainly what's new is social media. So if some candidate somewhere raises an eyebrow at another candidate, that becomes a huge story and a video that gets passed all over the place. And whether we like it or not, we're going to have to learn to cope with that because we can't change the technology here. It's only going to get worse, frankly, I think. But that's a problem. So just to understand that this problem has always been there in the day and age of the Jeffersons and Adams, it was a newspaper that was cranked out. In today's world, it's Facebook. But so don't be too disturbed by all this because this is what happens in a free society.
Well, it's even older than that, Jeffrey, right? Like Jesus tells stories about Samaritans that were, intentionally like meant to say, oh, these people that you think are so far outside of the reign of God, guess what? They are actually intimately indicative of what the reign of God looks like. And so, and those stories were meant to call us to see our common humanity. And I think that is what we're doing now. And it is so easy because of screens to say, oh, that's just screens. That's just words on a page. Like I can go at that person. But what we're asking for is to remember, like behind the screen, behind the words is a beloved.
As I often say, I mean, we're sitting here having this conversation in the 21st century via computers. Man first got started building fire, and now we're into computers. The technology changes, but human beings, alas, don't. There's good ones, bad ones, indifferent ones, etc.
And there you have there you have it. And that, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. I'm going to let our guests have the final say, but what I really have come and battling with, to be honest, is I like the message here that if we just sit down and talk to other people, things will be okay. But I come to grips with the thing that there are some mean people out there who really want to hurt me. And so how do I come to grips with being nice to them and letting them hurt me? This is the struggle. Well, there you go. So I'm going to leave it to our experts to end it on something that we can all take with us. So Reverend Jones and then Bishop Miller.
I will let Bishop have the last word. But yeah, I think, right, our understanding of peace isn't isn't passive. It's not to say, oh yeah, just let the bad people walk all over you and hurt you, you know, especially if you are victims of oppression and discrimination. We want a peace that is just, a peace that is takes into consideration, right, the whole of humanity, and peace that sees people for as valuable and beloved as they are. And so that doesn't mean not calling out hatred and violence and oppression when we see it, but it means engaging with the human beings who might be using that language and that rhetoric with curiosity, with compassion, and with kindness. So we want systems of oppression. Yeah, we're going to rail against those all day long. Racism, sexism, all the isms, ableism, right? We want to say those things, we want to say no to. But the people who are involved in those systems, we treat them with compassion and kindness.
Or as those great philosophers, John Lennon and Yoko Ono used to say, all we are saying is give peace a chance.
I'm tempted to let, I'm tempted to let that be the last word.
We'll still let Bishop Miller have the last.
I do want to say that again, that particularly from our one thing from our Christian standpoint, that as Aaron was saying as well, that we want to see people for who they are, not always for what they say or and necessarily what they do. That's the way of Jesus for us, that we see the humanity in the people. We're not going to call on individuals to put themselves in danger, but we do know that when we act for peace, it is a dangerous thing. And part of this statement and part of our calling for people to sign on to the statement is to invite people to come together where we are safer in numbers and more able to support one another and protect one another, and make space for those among our communities who are more vulnerable to also share their voices. Because as you so rightly said, Joyce, some of us are more vulnerable than others because of the way that the rhetoric is spoken, because of the history and the systems that are in existence. And we want to be able to bring those voices forward, amplify those voices. We aren't going to call it. On Sunday, we read the story where Jesus called a woman a dog and her people dogs. And we had to confront that in our sermons on Sunday. Some people did, some didn't. And I chose to confront that, to say, well, maybe Jesus is showing us what not to do. That because Jesus in the end does for the woman what she asks and says, there is a human being here with very human needs. And we want to see that. We want to lift that up and help people to know that no matter our political positions, no matter our what we say and who we're voting for, we are still human beings, and we are human beings that must live together. As we've heard, we even heard on the day at the press conference, we either stand together or we fall together. We fall separately. I mean, we want to join together to stand for peace.
Well, very good. I think are we all on the same page on that one, Jeffrey? There's no battle over that. Well, very good.
All of us and John and Yoko, it works well.
And John and Yoko. Well, I, on behalf of the PennLive's editorial board, I really want to thank you, Bishop Miller and Reverend Aaron Jones, for being here and bringing this very, very important message. And of course, you have the influence with hundreds, if not thousands of people to be able to really affect some sort of peaceful atmosphere. So, and we will do our part to help amplify your voice in our communities. So with that, I thank you all very, very much and wish you all the best. We'll stay in contact. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.